Guys, this is Rich Garaputa with Denovo, and thank you for joining the Navigating Tariff Turbulence webinar that Denovo is putting on with eFlux. And we're just about to begin. Okay, guys, welcome to the Navigating Tariff Turbulence webinar from Denovo and eFlux. We will be covering JD Edwards functionality to support tariffs, and then eFlux Swift capabilities in order to be able to either fill the gaps in JD Edwards or provide a more agile solution that's standard JD Edwards functionality. So our agenda for today, we'll do some quick introductions, both on the Denovo side and the eFlux side. We'll cover tariff challenges and how businesses are addressing those challenges using both JD Edwards Enterprise One functionality and then Swift for automation. Then go through a demonstration of Swift and finish out with questions and answers. So please put your questions in the chat window as you go, and we'll get to those towards the end in our Q&A session. A little bit about me. My name is Rich Garaputa. I have been implementing JD Edwards for over 29 years. It'll be 30 years in February. I'm the Vice President of the JD Edwards practice here at Denovo. I started out implementing JD Edwards World software as an installer and programmer. Moved over to supporting the supply chain, value chain applications in the World product. Was one of the first developers and CNCs trained in the field on One World, which is now Enterprise One. Moved over back to supporting supply chain, value chain applications in Enterprise One. Been a project manager, practice manager. Here at Denovo, my primary role is to support our customers in architecting solutions for real business value, focusing on business process using JD Edwards and third-party technologies, and providing a road mapping for JD Edwards optimization and JD Edwards to the cloud. Ali?
Hi, Rich, and good to be with all of you here at this Denovo's webinar. So this is Ali Nassim, founder of eFlux. So I've had over 20 years experience of what I like to call as a connected enterprise. And the idea is how you basically connect your ERP with all the innovations out there and make it simple for you to do that. So I've been a no-code evangelist for ERPs. I've been part of the customer advisory board at Oracle for the emerging tech space. Been working with some of the top CIOs, kind of advising them on how to adopt this no-code and AI paradigm amid all this turbulence that's happening out there. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Ali. A little bit about Denovo. We have a customer-first culture, making sure that our customers receive the highest level of service. We're also an Oracle-first solution provider based in Boulder, Colorado, just outside of Denver. We provide public and private cloud hosting solutions, leading with Oracle OCI. Have a very large managed services install base on both the infrastructure, the applications, and technology of Enterprise One. I've been around a long time, so I've completed a lot of projects, both full-scale implementations, divisional rollouts, implementation upgrades, module implementations, and smaller projects as well. Focus on all of the target areas for the JD Edwards application. We provide full service across all of these industries. As we talk about tariff challenges, and as my customers have been engaging me in their conversations, I always start with really what are the challenges that you're facing. And dealing with tariffs can be pretty confusing. They're changing very rapidly. Which items specifically are targeted, which countries are targeted, whether they're general tariffs across a broad category, are there specific carve-outs for specific items? So even determining which items are impacted can be quite a challenge. And then with the rates constantly changing, it's really hard to determine a rate structure that is and maintain that rate structure as they change. One of the single biggest problems, however, is the visibility that businesses have to the tariffs that are being implemented, especially as they provide different or have different purchasing and sourcing strategies within the organization. Some areas of complexity. So do you have a single item that comes from multiple suppliers, and those multiple suppliers have different countries of origin? Or do you have a single item from a single supplier, and that that supplier uses multi-country of origin as well? So you can see that there can be various complexities when it comes to managing these types of things, and different ways for JD Edwards to handle those natively. Other questions, do you include that the cost of those tariffs, those import duties, in the item cost or not? And then do you pass those through to the customer? And that might differ if you're in a buy-sell environment versus a manufacturing environment. And buy-sell is pretty straightforward. You're buying an item and then you're reselling that same item to a customer. In a manufacturing environment, you might be buying a component or multiple components from different countries of origin subject to different tariffs, assembling those components into a single finished good, and then reselling that finished good to the end customer. So there's additional complexities on how to pass through those costs to the customer and decide whether to display those or not. But I always ask the customers before they kind of get into the solution is really, well, what is your goal? Because the business goal that you have will really drive the solution option that you have in JD Edwards. Sometimes customers just want to track that general financial impact of what tariffs are so that they can better understand the tariffs and develop a strategy around it once they have more information. Sometimes they do want to maintain detailed item costs, and that's really important where item costs change very rapidly, and the item cost directly drives the price to the customer. Sometimes they want to track cost trends of the underlying product itself without the external factors of the tariffs. And so they really want to kind of track two different things at once. In a few cases, we see the desire to recapture full costs or partial costs in customer pricing, and the option to display or not display those pass-through costs to the end customer. So really kind of mapping out the overall business goals is really important before you start to dig into what solutions JD Edwards has to offer. Starting out with kind of one of the primary areas of managing those costs would be Enterprise One landed cost capabilities, the ability to capture the entire cost of getting those items from the origin to the destination. And those could include harbor fees, brokerage fees, import duty, freight fees, fuel charges. So any number of different charges that might come from different vendors. So you might be charged a brokerage fee from a warehouse and the freight fee from a freight forwarder. So these different charges appear from different places and come from different suppliers. And all of those can be detailed and captured in JD Edwards landed cost capabilities. At the very basic, you set up user-defined codes to identify the various cost components that you want to track. And then you can develop landed cost rules to drive really how those costs are calculated and applied. So landed costs can be applied by supplier and item. They can be a percent of the underlying cost or a plus amount, a flat amount that's added to the cost, depending on how you receive those charges from the supplier. And they can be controlled by effectivity date. So as tariffs change, you can phase them in and phase them out, and maintain that tariff structure within JD Edwards. And all of this is actually applied at the branch plant. So you can actually define these for different parts of the organization and handle them differently depending on the costs in that particular location. Another note about the landed costs, you can decide whether to include that portion of the cost within your product cost or not. And you can also decide whether or not that cost should be vouchered. Enterprise One landed costs can be captured at the purchase receipt. So the time of receipt, once you know all of those charges, if you know those charges, then you can capture some or all of them upon receipt of the purchase order. You can do the receiving and then capture landed costs in a separate standalone process. That's either designed to capture all of the costs or whatever costs you didn't have up front at the purchase receipt time, or you can do it during voucher match. So there's multiple ways and multiple steps within the business process where you can enter those costs as they become known to you. Internally, the Enterprise One landed cost can be driven by country of origin. So you can configure the tariff costs by country. And the system has kind of a prioritization on how it applies those. At the very top level would be at the lot level. If there's nothing configured at the lot level, it would be at the purchase order receipt level. If there's, and then it will default to the item branch. But that top level is real important, especially when we talked about those two scenarios where you may have the same item sourced from multiple vendors, from multiple countries of origin, or the same item purchased by a single vendor from multi-country of origin. That lot level control allows you to capture the specific landed cost for that specific receipt. Now, you can see the complexity here. If you're not already using lot control, we'll be implementing lot control specifically to handle the landed costs of that more complex supply chain multi-vendor sourcing. So, and Enterprise One landed costs, the pros of implementing landed costs, you can really capture a lot of detailed cost data at a very granular level. Pretty much real time, depending on when you receive the data. As I mentioned, you have 3 different places at points in the process in which you can capture those costs. Lots of flexibility to handle changes since you have those effectivity dates. You can phase them in, phase them out. You can choose whether or not to update your item cost or not. So you can capture your landed cost separately from your item cost or roll it into your item cost, allowing you to kind of maintain stability from a historical cost perspective and report those landed costs separately if you want. And if you're using pricing rules based on item costs, it can drive the item price to the end customer. Cons, obviously, lots of setup and maintenance, especially with all the different country codes that might be involved, the different items that might be involved, and depending on the complexity of your sourcing strategies, there can be quite a bit of setup and maintenance ongoing. Obviously, additional data entry is required at that point of either receipt or invoice, and so you've got multiple points in the process where you might add additional data entry step. In general, if you want the landed costs to be accurate, you're going to need detailed data from your suppliers. Otherwise, you will have kind of generic, and we've seen that before, more generic baseline landed costs that are assumptive rather than specific. And if you have delayed data availability, so you don't have those costs up front at those points in the process, you may delay a specific step in the process, waiting for the cost detail to come in before you can execute that step in the process. So you have to kind of weigh these. This is not just an application configuration, it could be a process change. As I mentioned, with that implementation of lock control for multi-sourcing, it can be a broad impact from an implementation perspective. So that was the landed cost approach, capturing the cost components at the level of the item and in the purchasing process. There's a different approach that you may choose to use. It's a little simpler. So rather than capturing these costs in the purchasing process, you can capture tariff costs directly in the chart of accounts during invoice pricing. So you can use a subledger to track specific cost by item, and you don't have to track all of those costs. You can specifically track just tariff costs separately. You'll have to develop custom reports for visibility to this data, and it doesn't impact item costs. So if you're trying to either make that decision, am I going to drive that cost of the tariff into my product cost, or am I going to hold it separately and use it for reporting and visibility purposes? The GL approach can help you hold that separately. Much more moderate setup and maintenance effort, still additional steps during the process, and you're maintaining this pretty much all in the GL account for reporting rather than configuring landed costs. On the flip side of that, so we talked about those inbound costs and tracking those inbound costs. The flip side of it is how do we charge those back to our customers if we decide to do so? And that's a big business decision. A lot of companies have kind of started to move forward with this, then backtracked on it. Many of them have just updated their cost structure in general. But you can have your item cost drive the item price. So if you're using landed costs and you're rolling that into your product cost, and then your item price is determined by your item cost, that can automatically roll through using JD Edwards pricing. You can use advanced pricing or pricing to pass through tariffs to customers. This is generally a more generic type of tariff cost. So so rather than maintain you may still maintain the landed cost rules and landed costs to understand your internal costs, but this will be a separate setup using advanced pricing in order to be able to pass through those tariffs to the customers based on item or item group, or even by customer. So you may pass through tariffs to some customers and not other. Using the pricing rules, you can add a % of the item price or a fixed amount. It can be applied both at the line level and order level. So it's essentially using pricing or advanced pricing rules to do so. The challenge here is there's no out-of-the-box ability to apply these by an item supplier or country of origin. So in general, if you're doing single sourcing from a specific supplier or a set of suppliers from a specific country, and then those tariff costs are more consistent. But if you're using kind of a multi-sourcing strategy and from the same item from different countries of origin, pricing isn't going on the JD Edwards side. Pricing is not going to be able to be dependent on that country of origin to charge a specific tariff amount or charge a tariff or not. So you've got some limitations there. But typically, what we see on the outbound, on the customer pricing side, is pricing rules or advanced pricing used for surcharges in a more kind of a more simple approach, either a generic tariff charge across the board for specific items, or a % of the item cost as a pass-through. There's a brief rundown of applying JD Edwards functionality for landed costs and the GL method on the inbound cost side, as well as the outbound customer pricing side using pricing and advanced pricing. Now I'm going to turn that over to Ali so that he can show you some capabilities of eFlux Swift and how it can address this business problem.
Thanks, Rich. So let me pull up my slide real quick. Let me know once you start seeing my screen. Can you guys see the screen?
Sure can, Ali.
All right, so yeah, so thanks, Rich, for setting that whole foundation, right? So as we know, JD Edwards is a very strong foundation, and you kind of gave some great examples of how this whole tariff situation can be handled. What I'm going to cover more is with all the volatility, right, with all this turbulence, what's the best approach, right, to build on top of that JD Edwards, to extend that core functionality that JD Edwards has using no code and AI. So there's this whole research that is happening because there's a lot of turbulence, by the way, on the aircraft that has increased over the past few years because of climate change. And they've researched a lot about this, and there's an MIT and NASA working on this, thinking about how do you counter this volatility, right? Do you increase more stability in the airplane? Could you like strengthen the core, or you bring in more agility? And so it turns out that that's the way to go. You have to have more agility in order for you to counter that volatility. Like taking that same in mind, let's map it towards this whole tariff volatility situation, right? And why this matters so much now that you have that sort of agility in terms of how you implement those solutions, because tariff volatility has kind of become a continuous thing. It is not episodic anymore. What that really means is the tariffs are changing faster than the ERP cycles. Like the pace at which you can change ERP, is much slower than the tariffs and how they're changing. And these shifts are happening like quarterly or even faster than that. So the manual updates, the delays, the errors, the loss margins, they're all big issues now, right? So it's not a one-time configuration problem anymore. It's a continuous operating challenge that we are facing. The real impact of that volatility is obviously those hidden costs, the operational drag, that margin erosion, and all of that, ends up having that ripple effect across the whole supply chain. It's not just one module, right? It's procurement, it's logistics, your finance. So you not only have to have agility, you also need to have it across the whole enterprise, really, right? So that's the other thing that is key to keep in mind as we go through. And we'll go through a really cool demo to show all this in action, what that really means in practice. Now, why those traditional ERP approaches, are great at till certain point, and then you need that sort of agility on top, right? So rigid systems, they struggle with frequent regulatory changes. The tariff logic, if hard-coded inside of the ERP, is gonna become a technical debt, right? And those change requests that you're gonna need is gonna create those long IT backlogs. So it's just gonna become an irrelevant, frustrating cycle, right, that you will get stuck in. Having a real-time visibility in a conventional way is harder, as we'll see how these no-code and AI agents are going to help us achieve it. So ERP is a great system of records and not essentially the system of agility, right? That's we're going to be talking about here. What should be a better model, right? How do you decouple that agility from the core? How do you keep your ERP for stability and have flexibility at the edge? By externalizing the tariff logic and workflows. And that's what we're going to talk about, how Swift allows you to do that. How can they be business led? Because again, these decisions and the pace at which these decisions need to be made, you cannot spec them out per se, right? And then they're going into a typical software cycle or development cycle, and then you doing a UAT on it. But by the time you end up UATing, maybe the changes have, the new changes are coming in, so you're always in that cycle. So how do you keep the core clean and solid and stable while having that edge with flexibility? Introducing that no-code and AI paradigm and the deep expertise. The reason we are conducting this webinar together is because Denovo has deep ERP, supply chain, trade expertise, right? Once you couple that expertise with this no-code and AI platform that eFlux Swift brings in, that makes that real combination that allows that sort of business agility without customizations, right, or risky customizations. So the platform plus the domain knowledge is always greater than the tools alone. So we're not talking about just technology here. We're talking about this full end-to-end that is required. So let's talk about how the no-code and AI enable real-time tariff agility. First of all, business-driven tariff rules that can be configured in partnership with the business and deployed instantaneously, so that you don't need to get into, like I said, the development cycle and the deployment cycle, but they are continuous. They can automatically trigger whenever those rates change happen. The landed cost can be recalculated dynamically, and this whole workflow orchestrations, are done at a speed where the policies can be changed at the speed of the trade. So example use cases, and we'll talk about some of the as I run the demo over the next 20-30 minutes of how this looks in practice. But these are some of the examples that you might be interested in, right? So tariff change alerts, automated cost impact analysis, maybe recalculation of the landed cost, adjustment, dynamic pricing, supplier rerouting, maybe identifying new places to source based on your tariff conditions, identifying whether the inventory transfers between your locations within the U.S. warehouses are better, or you need to get them from from some of your global suppliers or manufacturer internally. Right? So all those decisions, these are very, very dynamic decisions that you would imagine. You cannot do them in a conventional way. So from a demo perspective, let's take that scenario, right? So what I'm going to do here is introduce you to Swift Agent Studio, and we'll take some of those examples. And before I go there, let me kind of show you an an agent that we've already built here. So first I'm going to go take you through some of those scenarios, and then we'll build that agent grounds up and be able to change them on the go. So what you see here is one of those agents, right? So let me maximize this. So here what we're seeing is my interaction with that agent, right? So I started with, in a very plain English, in a very brainstorming way, I'm asking it, I'm looking for a stock replenishment strategy for my product 210. We are having a demand spike. We're expecting a demand spike for our M30 branch. What do you suggest? So I'm not asking it to, I'm in the brainstorming mode, right? I'm telling my frustrations, my challenges to this AI agent is going to actually, based on my JD Edwards data, is going to tell me what is the best course of action, whether whether approving an existing purchase order for this particular item from local vendors is better, or maybe doing a transfers between the different branches is better. And then again, taking into account which are the foreign suppliers, where the country of origins are, based on which, what are the pros and cons of different scenarios, and then looking at the current availability, right, of this particular item in my local warehouse. What are the best courses of action? So I'm going to keep moving here. The idea really is not a very structured asking the system for a report, looking at the report, and then seeing what action need to be done. This is all interleaved, right? So here within the same agent, I could be asking those questions, and based on recommendations, actually taking actions within the agent. For example, I could get the details of a certain purchase order and then say, okay, go ahead and approve that purchase order. Are there any other purchase orders that I should be looking at, reviewing it based on the current tariff policies, conditions, right? For example, I'm looking at here, like based on the tariff conditions, what are your recommendations? So I've got this Capital System, which is a local vendor, and then we have Parts Emporium, which is a Chinese vendor, right? So it's kind of going to keep giving me all those options based on what prices are being offered, how much demand I have in the coming weeks. All of those things are being considered, and then it's kind of giving me those options that if I go with this one, the price is going to remain consistent because it's domestic and there's stable sourcing. But then if the alternates are that I can go to Parts Emporium, which is in Shenzhen, China, but then there are other considerations there, right? The custom clearance, the elevated lead times, and obviously the tariff, 25% tariff on there. I could further debate with it, ask it, okay, what else can I do? What other options I have, and kind of go through that in a very, very easy, natural, conversational way, as opposed to looking at tons of screens, trying to compare those numbers. This AI is kind of helping me do all of that very, very simply. Just another quick example here, where I'm kind of debating with it, like which countries, based on my supplier data, based on the products that I procure, based on the parts, what are those things? What are the open purchase orders that I could approve based on the demand spike that I'm looking at? Whether they should be coming from Canada, should be coming from Mexico. What are the situations in what are the tariff percentages in Brazil? So it's all doing it in real time. It's looking at using LLM, figuring out if there was a new tariff policy that was announced very recently, and what impact is that going to have on my supply chain, right? Now that's, as you can see, it's pretty cool, right? But what's really cool about this is how this has been built. So it wasn't built by going through a development cycle. This agent itself was built just by debating with the system. So we have this, what we call a Swift Agent Studio, where we have these tons of agents that you can build, but how you build them is pretty cool. So what I'm going to literally do is I'm going to say, or I could Google it up and then say, what are the good best practices for creating an agent? But instead of creating an agent manually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask AI to help me build it. So I'm going to say, create a tariff and landed cost agent for JD Edwards to ensure that we can dynamically change our cost and pricing rules based on the changing tariff policies. I'm going to hit create on it. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to go out, look at the best practices. I could go specific, I could go deeper, like in terms of my industry, I could give some more details to it. The more details I give to it and I can brainstorm with it, the better agent is going to get created. So here you can see it's created a tariff lander. is given the basic description, some initial sort of guardrails and chat suggestions. I can design it the way I want it. I can provide some from our procurement policies. So I could upload my PDF documents for my procurement policies, right? Do's and don'ts, any links, any files, or just provide some text. So it's going to take into account all of that to make sure it doesn't just give me some generic options or recommendations or takes generic action. It's going to be very specific to my enterprise and my sourcing policies. Now, the best part that it does is it creates this agent's flow. Now, all these different nodes, there are two types of nodes primarily, and there's a start node, intelligent nodes, and the action nodes. What intelligent nodes do is they, like, based on just that initial prompt I gave it, it basically created all these on its own. Where it's saying, giving some plain English, think of it like a meta prompt instruction, a prompt to be able to infer the prompt of what the end user is going to be asking or going through. So these prompts, it kind of auto-populates them. And then also, as you would notice here, refer to an action node. Now, the action node is where you could actually get the data back from your, or take action, either fetch data from your ERP or update the data inside of your ERP. So in this case, for example, we are doing a calculate the landed cost. Now, what I can do is I can literally call any of my existing orchestrations, or I can create a Swift flow in order to do that. So let me show you that agent we were interacting with, how that's operating. But before I do that, let me just show you a couple of quick things. So if I want to change any business rule, I don't have to go into a development cycle. All I need to do is give more instructions right here in plain English, and then give it more scenarios in plain English, and it's going to start understanding those scenarios. So the point I was trying to make that with a lot of volatility, you have to have a lot of agility, and you cannot have that unless you kind of do it in a fundamentally different way. And this is what the Agent Studio is allowing me to do. Now let me go back to that particular agent we were interacting with, and then see how it is performing all those things. So I'm going to open up this supply chain agent. Here we've got that basic persona, we've got the design, we have put in some procurement approval policies. In this case, we just put in some standard JD Edwards documentation, but you could give it more specific. These are the agents flows that we've got, right? So it's basically, this is the availability check one, where I'm looking at the stock availability, right? So I'm doing a stock check on my JD Edwards, and that stock check is calling an orchestration, or I could call directly a form service using the Swift flow. Now this is to ensure that we, based on the stock level, I can make those decisions whether I'm gonna be importing it from a global supplier, or I have in my warehouse enough supplies to kind of do it for the next 2-3 weeks, for example, right? Then you've got the purchase order rule engine that's going to actually able to approve the purchase order right from here. Again, by communicating with that agent, I would be looking at, okay, this is the one I'm looking at. Based on the tariff policies, recommend me the top 2 POs that can help me fulfill this demand, and keep in account all the tariff policies, the latest one that have changed. Again, in order to fetch the awaiting approval, I could just call that orchestration or call a certain form of JD Edwards directly from this tool without having to, again, go into a development or calling those APIs manually and do all of those things. Similarly, if I want to look at the details of a lot, right? Like Rich was mentioning, that you could do it at a lot level. And then if I also want to analyze the tariff impact, I could do that. I could create a tariff check, which can go back into my landed cost, pull data from my orchestrations or from the form services directly, and then collate all of that together into one conversational flow, where there are no rules, right? So as I interact with that agent, as I was, if I just reset that real quick, and then let's try and interact with it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to interact with this agent in the real time, and I could do it with my voice, by the way. So that's what I'm going to try and do. All right, so we have a situation here where we are expecting a demand spike on our M30 brand for our product 210. I would like for you to suggest me some stock replenishment strategy over the next couple of weeks. Also keep in account the tariff situation. All right, so now based on what the data I gave it, it's basically started to giving me suggestions, right? How should I prioritize internal production? I could connect it with my manufacturing, uh, modules, or some other third-party modules. The other cool thing about this tool is it's not just limited to uh, JD Edwards, right? So if you have any production planning tool that is outside of JD Edwards, you could connect the same thing with that. So it can really look at that whole enterprise, uh, wide data, and then start giving those recommendations. It can also tell me, if I should be acting on some existing POs, and I could tell it, okay, uh, can you show me the list of pending POs that I could approve in order for me to fulfill this demand? So here's coming up with this whole list of POs that might actually fulfill the demand. All right. So can you give me the details for the PO 2140? So now it's starting to give me the unit costs, right? So if I want to do the landed cost, I could also figure that out based on the supplier. So maybe in this case the supplier is Amazon, but I could say, all right, what would be the best supplier for this item 210, given their country of origin, so that I don't have to pay too much on the tariff side. All right, so it's kind of starting to give me the best choice is Canada, the second choice is Mexico, and then India, depending on their current tariff situations. All right, can you also recommend whether it's better to do some inventory transfers between our warehouses or go for more procurement? Yeah, maybe let's look at the stock availability, and then now see, it's starting to give me what's the available quantity. Again, based on the demand, based on my production capacity, based on the tariffs, it can bring it all of that together, right? Which typically would have been a huge problem to solve in such a dynamic way. Um, so it's kind of does all of that. So going back to the tool itself, right? So this, like, in order for me to build some of, like, the the no code part of it is allowing me to create these workflows, call these orchestrations, build these applications and AI agents in a completely no code way. And AI is on top of it, is helping me navigate through those processes that have been built using no code in a very conversational, contextually aware way of the problem statement. So when you give this power, the power that we're talking about here, in the hands of the subject matter experts, and IT gives them the foundation, and work with them as true partners, you can start seeing how much can be achieved with how much less effort. So with that, if there are any questions, I would love to take them as well. Yeah. So basically, one of the questions that we most commonly receive is, do you need to change or customize your JD Edwards in order for you to achieve some of this? Now that's the great news. You can do all the configuration on the functional side, but you do not need to further complicate stuff and write some custom business functions, or even in some cases you don't need to even put in orchestrations. That all of that can be done in the no code way on the Swift flow side. But if you have orchestrations, if you have those modules, the other cool thing that Swift does is it inherits all that business logic from, even if you've customized some of that business logic, it's basically is fully aware of that logic and kind of make use of that. So really, Rich, do you have any comments on this, or while we wait for more questions?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to understand is that you're leveraging existing JD Edwards functionality so that we can minimize the setup and the data configuration in JD Edwards and adapts and extends the functionality in JD Edwards without modification.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this is where the partnership comes in, right? This is where our partnership in Denovo and eFlux, and the reason for us to bring this together is for that very reason, right? Having that core ERP knowledge and all the things, the customers have configured already or would like to change, plus all this no code and AI layer on top of it. I think that combination gives that strong edge, as opposed to, because see, this is whole thing, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well now that we have a little bit of time. I mean, you must have heard a lot about this vibe coding thing, right? The problem we have with vibe coding, at least at eFlux, is, and I'm going to pull up this slide real quick. The vibe coding, the problem is, you use AI to generate tons and tons of code. So it's maybe good to start out to generate the code, but who's going to maintain that code? So that kind of ends up being technical debt at an AI speed. So if I were to solve the same problem of creating tariff rules and changes on the go using vibe coding, that would have meant I would have generated tons of code that might go obsolete pretty quickly, and then I'm get stuck in that cycle. Plus, I would have created these business logic silos. I wouldn't have really leveraged what already JD Edwards provides as a core functionality. So I would have been stuck in that sort of maintenance nightmare. If you compare that to this whole approach of no code plus AI, it kind of reversing that, right? It's not creating new logic if you already have that logic in your ERP. It's only creating that additional logic if it doesn't exist there, or if that logic cannot be, it's not a good candidate to be programmed inside of the core ERP. But all that fluidity, right, that we're talking about, where you have to take a look at all the different things that are happening out there, so the LLM can make sense of it, and then a vector database of all the metadata of your existing ERP systems to combine them both together is basically where your new functionality and your existing functionality, they kind of coexist in a very seamless fashion. The other key one is on vibe coding is, this whole idea of citizen developer and vibe coder. The problem is, you can maybe generate code, but the subject matter expert or business analyst type person cannot understand that code. So it just becomes almost impossible for you to transition from AI doing that code and then you trying to take the control. In this case, as you saw in this demo, when I created this last agent that I created, right, this tariff lander, I could, at any point, I can go in a very visual way and start changing stuff around without having to program in simple, plain English. If I want to add more action nodes here, if I want to add more scenarios here, it's all drag and drop, right? So I could add an action node right from there, create that, add a workflow to it. And within the workflow, if I want to add certain pieces, right? So if I want to add a push notification, for example, right? I want to send an email notification to suppliers. I can do all of that in a completely, like I could say email supplier for a better rate. I could do negotiations with my supplier right within that same workflow, right? As opposed to saying, oh, supplier communication is a different tool, my tariff is a different technology, and then my workflow is a different tool. So the benefit of Swift is it combines all of those pieces together into one tooling, which is very, very subject matter expert friendly, as opposed to a developer friendly tool. And any comments, Rich, on your part before I think we wrap up? There are no more questions.
I think you covered everything very nicely, Ali. Thank you very much. So if you have any additional questions, please enter those in the chat so that we can answer those for you. We'll hold that chat open for just a few more minutes.
I think one question that I keep getting on as well, I'll take that one up, is the governance and the auditability part of it, right? Because there's so much happening. Who's responsible? How do you audit that? So again, Swift is a SOC 2 compliant, SOX compliant, whole segregation of duty, all the track and trace. So everything that is happening within this agent, let me show you that agent we were actually interacting with. Everything is getting tracked. So it's not as if I'm just, creating a tool that just works, but it doesn't get tracked and traced. So all the things that I'm doing here, if I show you this logs, everything is being tracked. How many conversations happened? What was called? What was the intent? What data got back to us from JD Edwards? Every piece of it, right? So the whole tree structure, in this case, you see the JD Edwards environment, like everything is being tracked and traced. So it's not if you complete audit, like you can export these logs, you can have all the traceability at every level of detail that you would need. Who changed what, when, and who interacted with the agent, and why agent gave that response. So you can all the time track and trace it back to all those things as well.
So Ali, we do have one more question in the chat, and it really speaks to how this is implemented. The question is, do business users really make these updates, or does IT still have to be involved? And I think this is kind of a two-part thing. So there may be some JD Edwards configuration, depending on your organization is structured. Those would either be implemented by your internal business analyst. They might belong to the business or IT, but it's not a technical configuration or development configuration. And to maybe avoid some of the complications of the more advanced JD Edwards features and functionality, or closing some of those gaps to deploy Swift. Ali, can you speak to how a business user uses the Swift platform versus IT?
Yeah, one more question I see here is it just for the very large global organizations, not for the mid-market? So the answer is no, it is. The beauty of Swift is you can scale up very easily, but you can start small and very quickly. So it's not like your 6-month enterprise or 1-year-long enterprise project. It's a matter of days and weeks we're talking about here, from the point you evaluate that and go live with.
Yeah, and to that point, what we see, especially in the Swift platform, that it is, in general, I always see where smaller organizations have the same problems larger organizations have, just a lot fewer resources to apply to them. So having the right tools, especially the tools within JD Edwards, as well as a platform like eFlux Swift, really allows you to add a lot of capability very quickly, but without heavy development, and be able to adapt more quickly. So I think it's very applicable to smaller organizations. Also, there was a question, how is this different from just configuring tariffs directly in JD Edwards? I think that's kind of targeted at Swift. Well, there's some data configuration that you might have in JD Edwards, and Swift links directly into the JD Edwards data. It also is aware of the JD Edwards applications and can act on those JD Edwards applications in a external process-based format. So there may be some JD Edwards configuration as well as the Swift workflows that Ali has shown. So Ali, anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing, regards to where it can also be deployed, right? So these agents can actually be deployed, either exist within your existing applications or portals inside of your JD Edwards as a Cafe One or a E1 page, or it can be deployed right inside of your Microsoft Teams or Slack. So the workflow, your day in job doesn't change; it just becomes smarter without you having to learn a new tool. That is again a key thing when it comes to adoption of a new technology, right? Unless you make people to look elsewhere and click some other systems, the adoption goes down. The other part, the empowerment of subject matter experts in terms of co-creating these tools also enhances the adoption big time. So the point that you can configure them in the ERP or not, like you saw how quickly those changes appear, those new scenarios come in, new tariff rules come in, how can business quickly hop on to a system like this, get to the agent studio, start changing some of that, click deploy, and you are ready to go, right? That typically does not happen in a typical ERP development cycle, right? You have to do all of those things and then wait for a fortnight to make those changes happen. You don't have that luxury anymore, unfortunately, in today's day and age.
Yeah, and to that point, if you've configured the underlying landed costs and you're using landed costs to manage those tariff costs internally, or you've configured the JD Edwards pricing rules in order to be able to apply tariff uplift to your sales order lines, the configuration and the maintenance of that within JD Edwards can be significant as well as time delayed. Adding that layer of Swift on top of it to manage those incoming rules and the changes to those rules so that they can be rapidly deployed to the underlying JD Edwards configuration is an excellent use case for it. That lets a smaller organization be able to manage these changes and the updates to JD Edwards with much fewer resources.
Yeah, and one more thing I keep hearing, right, is the debate about compliance versus agility, right? Like one of the questions I keep receiving is, it safe for the business users to get empowered to make those changes? Does that look like a shadow IT or a shadow AI in this case? Now that's the key here, right? Because once you have the foundation and IT is responsible for that foundation, for that platform layer, right? You make sure nothing bypasses that layer. There's no siloed systems trying to hit your ERP, without that compliance and traceability and auditability there. So that's the important part, that being SOC 2 compliant and SOF compliant, you have to make sure that segregation of duty, not just in terms of who's making those changes, but also who can do what. Inheriting all your existing security postures, be it from your ERP or otherwise, is the foundation, right? Where Swift has really worked hard to make sure, and has been adopted by some of the most compliance sensitive industries, like airports, large precious mining companies, right? Some of the ones that are just crazy and cynical about their security compliances. So having that compliant foundation and that agility on top is the right way of looking at it, as opposed to just asking everybody to become a vibe coder in the enterprise and go haywire. This foundation of no code and then agility and the autonomy of AI kind of helps you get that in place.
Thanks, Elaine. So I think the underlying message is the eFlux Swift platform helps you leverage the power and the capabilities of the underlying JD Edwards functionality and data without the overhead that would normally come from a development lifecycle within JD Edwards Enterprise. Well, thank you so much, Ellie. I appreciate the presentation here. We're about out of time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap these up. Thank you all so much for attending, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Reg. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.